Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Well, Stephanie Walsh was a senior buyer for Lidl in Ireland and Northern Ireland and has seen the good, bad and indifferent pitches made by Irish food and drink SMEs that are looking to secure a listing with the major retailer. Now, in her role as a food business consultant with ifac, Stephanie has been instrumental in developing the Cracking the Retail Code Guide for Irish food and drink SMEs who are looking to get their products on supermarket shelves. And Stephanie joins us now to discuss the do's and don'ts of pitching to multiples. Stephanie, you might start by providing us with an overview of your retail experience.
Of course, Karl. So I suppose I started in retail about 10 years ago. I started as a store assistant with Lidl Ireland in Northern Ireland. And then I did that for about 4 years and I joined the graduate programme then in head office as a buyer. Progressed into buying career for the last 6 years, I suppose. And recently was an ex-senior buyer for Lidl as well.
And what's involved in the life of a buyer?
Yeah, a very fast-paced environment. I suppose, like starting from the start, developing products. So as a buyer, you would do a range review every single year and you look after a specific category. So me, for example, I looked after dairy and we do a range review once a year and decide which products would come into stores, which products would be removed from the category. And from there, that kind of decision and strategy piece would move on and you would then progress the business. So you'd go on and look at new negotiations with current suppliers and developing products and packaging to suit the consumer needs.
You've undoubtedly witnessed some good and bad pitches during your time at Lidl, but what were you specifically looking for in the pitch?
Doing the homework when you're pitching a product into a retailer or a buyer was kind of the essential piece. So that would be, going out to the market, assessing what makes sense, what kind of trends you're seeing in the market, if there was a gap in a retailer. So like in Lidl, we would have often seen suppliers come in and say, okay, well, you have a gap in the market for this product and we would like to launch with you. This is the reasons why X, Y, and Z, and backing up with data, etc., to prove a point. So kind of logical steps around that. So that kind of doing the homework was the most essential and the best way to pitch a product within a retailer.
And what were some of the common mistakes that you saw food and drink business owners making?
Not understanding what data there is out there. So the likes of Cantor data, Mintel data, and using kind of Board B as well. And any information that could guide them in order to make a kind of a logical presentation for a retailer. Not bringing in samples that are freshly made or packaging that's readily available. And pitching a really concise and appropriate presentation to the retailer and do their homework on the retailer's range as well and their competitive landscape within that.
And how important is it for these businesses to keep an eye on what's happening internationally? How led and said are we here in Ireland by international trends in food and drink?
Yeah, I suppose it always kind of filters back into Ireland and it's kind of a delayed effect and depending on the category as well. But it's definitely really important. The likes of kind of the ready meals area that would have started off really heavy in the likes of the UK brought back into kind of Ireland as well. You see lots of cuisines popping up in the convenience section over the last number of years. But really important to understand the trends happening in Europe and globally to see kind of how it will impact your category and being that kind of step ahead and showing the retailer that you are a step ahead as well.
Something that I've seen for years in the likes of Walgreens in the US is the member-based pricing and then non-member-based pricing for the consumer. We've seen one or two supermarket chains starting that here recently. Is that something that you're going to see continue, do you think?
I suppose it's kind of the cost of living crisis piece as well, that we have seen customers are increasing their frequency throughout the store, so they're looking for promotions quite frequently in store and they're shopping a little bit less of a whole shop and shopping more frequently in stores. So they're looking for promotions to drive their kind of budget, I suppose. And I think you probably will see that continue throughout the retail landscape. And I suppose if you have a look at the major retailers are doing some sort of a discount or a loyalty scheme or a voucher piece.
And is it common for supermarket chains to provide a listing at a local level first to a food and drink business before they'll go national?
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose that we touch back with that in the guide piece as well. It touches on kind of contract types and stuff like that. So yeah, like the likes of some of the multiples, they they allow like regional listings in order to see, test the market to see if something makes sense, or logistically wise for a supplier, will that make sense as well, operationally and scalability.
And I suppose given the difference in size and scale, small food and drink providers often feel that they don't have any bargaining power when it comes to negotiating with a food retailer. What tips have you got for them in this regard?
Yeah, so we're cracking the Code to Retail guide, has actually negotiation tips in that. So I suppose from a buyer perspective, there's lots of power, I will say, from kind of a retailer side, but also suppliers have lots of power as well on the other side. And there's lots of kind of key elements that fall into that. The likes of the negotiation tips that we have in our guide, like for an example, would be understanding your sales data versus the previous tender. It's really important to understand whether you as a supplier is gaining volume in terms of turnover. And then the likes of kind of using data, seasonality in terms of products, etc., which will impact your costing.
And what advice do you have for businesses from a brand positioning perspective?
So this is kind of a tricky one from a supplier side. So the question is like private label or brand, and how do you even decide that? But I suppose there's lots of areas that will kind of impact that piece. And it's the likes of understanding your categories. So for an example, within the granola category, is there a market split between brand or private label, and what that market split is? Understanding your competitive landscape. Is it heavily led with the top leading brands? Is there a private label area? And then we also show advantages and disadvantages for the kind of brand and the private label area in terms of a food producer and also a retailer.
And is it true to say that not every retailer is the right fit for every product?
Yeah, 100%. Because lots of retailers have different kind of volumes, and also in terms of logistics. So we talk about that when we get to the piece on retailer channels. So we give lots of questions for suppliers to question themselves and say, okay, well, how many stores does this retailer have? What are the logistics hubs? So can I deliver to this logistics or DC, regional distribution centre? And then the other certain areas is like ask the industry for information on the knowledge on the retailer, understand and walk in the shop floor to understand the strategy of the retailer. And the whole operational and scalability piece is key with that as well.
And when it comes to launching a product in store, what type of supports should businesses be looking for from the retailers?
So in terms of understand what like promotional pricing looks like within their category as well. So for an example, if there was a pizza, you need to understand, okay, the rest of the competitive landscape promotes something 4 times a year. Is this something that we should be looking at? And, does the retailer offer that? Every retailer is very different, and every kind of negotiation is different. So it's something that you need to understand and then also tie into your negotiation strategy.
And of course, every business wants to have their product at eye level within the store. What are your tips in terms of achieving that?
That is a tricky one because every single retailer is different in terms of their planograms and their placements. But I suppose it's that final piece with pitching to a retailer. If you've done your research and your market review and your gap analysis, you'll understand where your product should fit. But it's also essential with your product design and packaging that no matter where it sits, it will sit okay and work for the customer. So that's kind of a key element in this as well. We talk about a little bit about packaging and design and your branding and getting a good understanding of what makes sense there as well.
And what are the retailers' top considerations when it comes to packaging today?
So sustainability is a piece as well they pick up on. And I suppose we've touched on that in the guide as well. And if anyone wants to download it, it's on www.ifac.ie. We've touched on the sustainability piece. It's really like use. Does it make sense to the customer? Is the customer used to it? And in terms of branding, etc., and design, it's lots of combination of elements that tie together to make sense to the retailer and the end customer.
And Stephanie, finally, you have a webinar coming up that will provide even more information about the Cracking the Code guide. When is that on?
Yeah, Karl, it's on the 15th of June at 2 p.m. So you can find it on our website as well. and it's going to be great. We have 2 food producers. One are Dobros in Galway and another one is Cologne. So I suppose a smaller producer up to a multi-million euro company, which is great. They're going to share their experience within the food industry. So it's going to be really useful and insightful, and we're delighted to launch it.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Stephanie Walsh from ifac, and the webinar on Thursday next is one that food and drink business owners cannot afford to miss.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.